Okay. All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our Meet the Voters rally. We have just had a tremendous amount of fun getting to know Biden Republicans who are putting country over party. And we wanted for you to hear from them as well. Since we began this really grassroots effort, we have no funding. We haven't spent anything on this. It's really taken off, and our rallies have reached over 205,000 people across our platforms. So Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. And we wanted to turn this platform over to the Biden Republican voters themselves to share why they've made their decision in 2020. And if you're an undecided voter and you're unsure, we hope that this is just going to be a really helpful time for you. We sent this out the other day, but if you haven't made up your mind yet, you're welcome here. You know, we don't believe that somebody is a bad person because they vote one way. That's not what this country is about. And so bring your questions and your concerns and your doubts, because I guarantee you somebody in this group shares those concerns and doubts. So without further ado, I'm gonna introduce you to our first Biden Republican voter. So that's gonna be Dave. Dave is from Western Pennsylvania. He is a veteran, and he submitted a video to RVAT that kind of went viral. That's Republican Voters Against Trump, kind of went viral, and now he's on a billboard in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So Dave, let me unmute you, and will you tell us a little bit about how you first started thinking about politics? Have you always been a Republican? How do you identify politically?
Sure. No, I've been I first voted Republican in 1976. I turned 18 in 74. I had to wait until the first presidential election in 76. Voted for Ford. I voted Republican in every presidential election up until and including 2016, because I wrote in John Kasich.
Okay. Yeah.
So I still think I voted Republican. I just didn't vote for the two main candidates, and frankly, Governor Kasich is a good man, and I was glad to vote for him. I wish I wish that things would have been a little different in terms of the outcome.
Yeah.
But I've been a Republican all my life. I think that's one of the reasons why and frankly, I was turned off on Donald Trump the day that he announced. I didn't like the tone of his campaign from the very beginning. I don't see a lot of joy in what he does. I see a lot of anger, and I think maybe that's what plays with I think populists are frequently that way. But right. His attitudes towards immigration, didn't care for it. His attitudes of anybody who wasn't what he would consider one of his people, I think that's part of the problem. His disregard for the rule of law, and I'm uncomfortable with somebody who feels there's no stops, no guardrails on their actions. It's a bad thing when you're compared to Richard Nixon unfavorably. I think that's, Richard Nixon, when he was asked to resign, did. In spite of all the things that he did, the man walked away. In a lot of ways, he was more of a patriot than Donald Trump is. I think that's kind of a bad thing.
Yeah, it's not very high praise, that's for sure. You're also a veteran, and I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about your service, how you served, and then what some of Trump's comments about troops and veterans have have meant to you and how that factored into your decision.
Sure. I spent 8 years in the Air Force, Strategic Air Command, and B-52s. It galls me to have him. The criticism that he made towards John McCain. I mean, that was yet another reason why I was never going to support him. His attitude, I think it's just he can't conceive of why somebody would do something for the betterment of others. You know, he doesn't have the ability to understand why a person might put on a uniform, pick up a weapon, go and protect their country, because he doesn't have that kind of feeling. And then to, you know, call them suckers and losers, you know, I mean, that's just, I mean, those are people that put their life on the line to protect him and give him the ability to do the crazy things he's doing. He should be a little bit more appreciative than that.
So Dave, eventually you got to a point where you said, I'm gonna go and not just vote for John Kasich or write in a third party person, but I'm actually gonna vote for the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden. When did you make that decision? Was it difficult for you? And, you know, is there a particular reason why you did that?
It was actually not as difficult as you might think. After going through and looking at it and realizing there really was only two choices, you know, one the choice I made to vote for Joe Biden was relatively easy.
Yeah.
I think he's the one that he's kind of the antithesis of Donald Trump in so many different ways. And so, you know, that actually was easy. The hard part for me was actually sticking my face out there and being, you know, more actively, you know, engaged with politics. I hadn't done that before. I'd always followed politics. I'd always voted, as always, you know, participated in that way, but never really went out and did anything. That was kind of a little crazy. And sometimes I sit back and I look at it and think, yeah, what were you thinking? But there comes a time when you just kind of have to stand up and, you know, take a position and then do what you want. I've got two fine sons, a grandson. I want to leave the world a little bit better of a place than what it is right now. And I think a Joe Biden election and all that he will bring with it, in terms of, you know, qualified people to take the positions in government that need to be filled by qualified people. I think he's going to be able to get us where we need to be. We need to. Well, I mean, I could go on forever and I won't, but
yeah,
a lot of things that are broke that need to be fixed.
Definitely. You know, I think you're not alone on that. And, you know, I am just hoping to get an adult in the room. I know that's a very low bar, but I believe Biden can be that kind of restoring voice for the country. So Dave, thank you. And stick around because we're going to do some group questions at the end for people to just chime in when they want. So next, I want to go to CJ, who I know as CJ, Christopher. He's a college student at American University, and he started College GOP for Joe, which has taken off and really gotten a lot of young Republicans involved in this fight. So he's been our pinch hitter. A lot of people ask Biden reps to appear at some of their events, and CJ has just blown away everybody when we sent him to them. So I'm excited for you to hear from him as well. CJ, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, this is an election I think is really unlike any other, and it's the first one I've ever encountered. You know, I think that quite a baptism by fire. I've considered myself a Republican or a conservative, at least, for as long as I can remember being aware that Republicans and Democrats were different things. You know, I remember back in the 6th grade, I was the only kid in my social studies class who voted for Mitt Romney in our mock election, and I was looked at with some suspicion for like a few weeks after that. I was like, hey, what's so bad about Mitt Romney? And so I really have identified with the conservative movement, with the Republican Party, because I believed in all the principles. I believe continually in tax cuts. I believe in a deregulated economy. I believe that America should be a voice for freedom and democracy around the world, and that it should have the strongest military in the world to back those words up. And watching Donald Trump betray pretty much every one of the values that I hold dear is what really convinced me. And I remember watching him when he got elected. I was sitting in my basement. It was actually my birthday. And we had all my friends over on election night in 2016. And we were taking bets on when we thought Mike Pence was going to concede the race, because we didn't think Trump was going to concede the race if he lost. And clearly we're being proven right in that. So we were like, oh, by 7:30, he's gonna concede the race and it'll be over. And then by 9 o'clock, he'd won Pennsylvania, and it was clear that Donald Trump had won. And I thought this was just going to be hilarious. I thought this was just going to be 4 years of comedy where he was just going to like call people fat and stupid on Twitter, but sign whatever Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan put in front of him, and that he was going to be an effectual conservative candidate who maybe said some things along the way that I didn't like. And I was willing to accept some of the things he said about Rosie O'Donnell or, Megyn Kelly or whatever. And if I got a conservative policy agenda, and for a while I did, I got conservative judges, we got tax cuts, we got deregulation. But watching what happened at Charlottesville and seeing him equivocate on both sides of that issue, as if there are two sides to that issue, was shocking to me. And then for him to follow it up a year later and go abroad and stand next to our number one geopolitical foe in Vladimir Putin and take his side over the brave men and women of our intelligence and defense community, a community that I hope to one day be a part of in terms of my profession, that was pretty awful to watch. And that was it for me. And I made the decision for Vice President Biden pretty much right after Trump was sworn in. I said, there's one man in this country and there's one Democrat in this country that I believe has the skills and deserves to be president. And to me, I like to say that Vice President Biden is not just a palatable alternative, but a preferable alternative. And I remember throughout the entire primary process, I was Biden or bust. It's either Biden or I don't know what's going to happen to this country. Yeah. And I was quite happy that he was the one who came out. But at the end of the day, this is a situation where you got to put what you value as an American citizen first. And you have to recognize that 4 years of maybe a marginally higher tax rate, or 4 years of maybe education policy that you could find a disagreement with, is not worth tearing democracy to the ground. I mean, we had a sitting president of the United States stand in the White House press briefing room and say that he might not accept the results of an American election and that he wouldn't commit to a peaceful transition of power. If that was happening in a foreign country, I would have supported an invasion of that country. And so this is a situation where you got to take a step back and you got to look at it and you got to say, what has Donald Trump given me? And is what he has given me really worth tearing down the foundations of this republic that we love so much?
Yeah, I think that's so well said. I think that really gets to especially his unwillingness to accept the election results, just screams anti-American, anti-Constitution. And I think your ability to see that it's bigger than one party and one person is really impressive. And I feel like I'm out of undergrad, but I feel like I'm still in school as a grad student, so it counts. But I'm so glad that, I'm not glad that Donald Trump happened to the country at all. That's not what I mean. But I am relieved that I now know it's okay to cross your party when you don't like them, when something wrong is going on. And I'm glad that happened earlier in my life than later. I'm curious, CJ, what do you think young Republicans and conservatives in high school and college, how are they thinking about this moment? Do you think they're going to be less tied to a political party and less partisan? Or do you think we're going to go into the normal behaviors of political life after November?
It's a great question. And it's something that we have at College GOP for Joe really tried to explore in depth, which is kind of what does the direction of the Republican Party look like once Donald Trump is defeated, because he has to be defeated. And what we have found as we've talked to college students across this country is that young conservatives are not as wedded to the Republican Party as an institution as some of our older voters might be, right? If you're a young Republican and you say, I'm a lifelong Republican, that means you probably voted a Republican for like 2 elections, right? You don't have an institutional memory and an institutional relationship with the party apparatus or whatever the case may be. And we found that many young conservatives are willing to compromise, willing to look across the aisle and say, hey, you know, there are issues that the Democrats are talking about that we need to focus on as well. I know young conservatives across the party ideological spectrum say climate change exists, climate change is real, and climate change is a problem that we need to enforce or to deal with. And the disagreement is, well, do we want to burn the US economy to the ground to deal with it? And that's where you have your policy disagreements. But from what we've seen at College GOP for Joe has really been that conservatives are a really brave group of people, and that sitting there, and we found that they are willing to go against the party orthodoxy. They are willing to sit there and say, hey, you know, I don't care what the oil industry says. I don't care what the tobacco industry says. I'm not beholden to them like some of the politicians are. I'm a young kid that has to sit in my room and take classes because my president couldn't handle a pandemic, or I have to flee my home because a wildfire is burning my house to the ground because we have delayed dealing with the effects of climate change. And so this is a situation where young conservatives are not less conservative than their older counterparts. In fact, I would argue some of them are even more conservative than their more established older counterparts. But what sets, I think, us apart is a less of a willingness to say whatever the Republican Party says goes. Whatever that the party orthodoxy says, that's what I'm going to go along with. And if the Republican orthodoxy says advocates for policies that may harm us, whether it's on climate change or student debt or whatever it is, then we're not afraid to sit there and say, hey, this isn't what we're voting for you for. You're not representing our interest, and we're going to change that. And for some of us, that means voting for a Democrat for one election to send a message. Some of it means let's take a look at the conservative movement and try to change it from the inside. And some of it says, this just isn't for me anymore. But at the end of the day, what we have seen is that young conservatives are brave. And this is something that I'm sure you remember from the Biden Republicans rally with Rick Wilson, a quote that really stuck out to us, to me, and that we've seen sort of furthered, is he said, courage is contagious. He said that when one person puts their hand up and says, hang on, what's going on here? You have a snowball effect. You have enough people are willing to sit there and say, what the heck? And that's what our model is at College GOP for Joe. Having individual conversations with people that you know as an ambassador for the cause and say, hey, look, you and I have been friends for years. You know this isn't right. You know it's not right to equivocate on Nazism. You know it's not right to gas peaceful protesters for a photo op. You know in your heart this isn't right. And what we have found is that when people come to you, when conservatives are approached from someone that they know and someone that has an ethos with them and says, I know you. I know who you are. I know what your values are. This man isn't it. And they see other conservatives around them saying, hey, this isn't right. That they're much more likely to put their hand up as well and say, yeah, this needs to change. And so that's what we've seen from our perspective at College GOP for Joe. That's what I've seen just as a member of the movement. And I hope that it's a trend that continues in the future.
Well, thank you. I think that gives us a lot of hope. CJ, thanks for being with us tonight. Next, we're going to go to Bianca. Bianca is she's been a consistent member of our Biden Republicans rally. She's got one of my favorite handles on Twitter. Bianca is a mother of a Marine, and she describes herself as an indie voter in her bio. And before I bring her on, I just wanted to read something that she tweeted out the other day that I thought was really powerful. And she said, my son suffered with COVID in a room with a well bunkmate. No mask, no test, no thermometer, all while Trump was downplaying, promising it was contained and would disappear like magic. my sewing circle made 500 masks for the troops. And I think, this this is a really difficult time for the country. And I think we get caught up in these political debates. We forget the human impact of failed leadership. And so, Bianca, I'd kind of like to start there and just talk about what you think is going on in this country right now and how it's affecting you and your family.
Okay, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So yes, my son is a firefighting Marine. He's in active duty currently. And I've had 3 generations of continuous service in my family. And my son's tour is almost up. And we've decided as a family that he should not re-enlist. None of us feel comfortable at this time, especially if Trump wins a second term. And I think that that's really shocking. I mean, it's shocking kind of to the levels of that our service is going through right now to try and retain and recruit people. And I think part of that is because, in the past, you expect the government to never put your family in harm's way unless they absolutely have to. But Trump is the kind of leader whom I believe would be willing to sacrifice our troops, the health of our nation for his own self-interest. And I think that's manifested in the COVID crisis. I mean, had we all known at the end of January that a pandemic was coming, I wouldn't have gone to Washington, D.C. to lobby for Rare Disease Week and came home with coronavirus and infected my son.
Wow.
So, I'm still dealing with lung issues. You can kind of hear it in my voice a little bit. And I'm a music teacher, so it's really a problem to have ongoing lung issues for me. I'm actually not teaching this year, but had Trump warned our country in January, had he taken the time to allocate funds to schools to move all of our classrooms outside and equip all of the teachers and staff with surgical masks and prepare us to start school in the fall outside. And had we dealt with this differently as a country during the summer, we would be open right now. Our economy would not be suffering and our schools would be open like other countries are. So for me, that piece of not dealing with the coronavirus appropriately is really, I hope, kind of the nail in his coffin and prohibits him from having another term. But just for me personally, my stepfather's a politician. He's a Democrat. And I was raised as a Democrat, but really as I became older, recognized that I have kind of an old-fashioned style to me. I am an independent school teacher, so I'm very passionate about school choice. So I became an independent, but then I joined the Republican Party when the Republican Party decided to really place an emphasis on school choice, which is something that's really important to me. And it's something that I think ultimately will benefit children of special needs and minority communities. What has been disheartening for me in the area of school choice is that Trump has undermined every argument. I mean, he had a unified government for 2 years, and when it was unable with Betsy DeVos to push through school choice, so completely ineffective in an area that's really important to me. He's undermined all the arguments for school choice by demanding from a national position to reopen the schools nationwide. When he decides that he wants to dictate that we should have a patriotic curriculum nationwide, that also undermines arguments for school choice. So there's no reason for me to even kind of hold my nose and hope that I will get that. I mean, he obviously has failed and has undermined all of the good arguments for school choice. So I would never have voted for him anyhow. I actually left the GOP actually at Charlottesville. So I'm now an independent voter. But he had 2 years to do. I honestly gave him the chance. I really felt like as someone, I didn't vote for either major candidate. So I voted third party. And I figured that it was appropriate to give him the chance and support him because he was our president. And I think the areas where he lost me from the get-go were Charlottesville for sure. I noticed after Charlottesville, I started getting more racist comments on Twitter that I'd never had before, like go back where you came from. And I'm actually Native American, so I have no place to go back where I came from because I came from here. But that was one incident. And then also my local county GOP leader started tweeting Nazis and QAnon, and has been kind of outed as a Nazi sympathizer in our county. And when that happened, it was clear to me that I could never rejoin a party that allowed that, and that has really kind of just turned its head. So he's being allowed to remain in his position until next year, but has received no repercussions from the state GOP. And that's just shocking to me that the party has kind of been taken over by white nationalists. The other part that really upset me was that Trump had an opportunity to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And it's something that neither party had been able to pull off to date. And so when he called for a bipartisan bill of love for DACA, he was actually given a really great bill called the USAA Act by Will Hurd, who's my family's House member. And he has the most border district in his area. And it was a comprehensive immigration reform package. It had a really, really good path to citizenship for DACA. And it was aggressive. And Trump just moved on, even though that had 40 bipartisan sponsors. He just moved on and really kind of caved to white nationalists. And that's when I realized, wow, this is really going to be, take the tone of and really kind of color his whole presidency. So after that, the corporate leaders that had kind of come on board to his administration all fell out. There, I had hoped that he would maybe work with them to voluntarily provide paid family leave and really look at how we could transform healthcare so we didn't have to be pushed into a socialized system. Maybe we could really look at, instead of shopping new plants and new industries, when Amazon does a new warehouse and there's kind of a bidding war nationwide to give Amazon the best bet, Trump could have encouraged these industry leaders to go to areas in our country that need the most industry. So we could have changed that paradigm and really had investment in our infrastructure and have business partners sign on to that so that we don't have to move into a big government scenario to address a lot of the issues that Christopher was talking about with climate change, healthcare, so on and so forth. And then the last piece for me is really the foreign policy piece, which is what has held me to the Republican Party, especially when, as a mom, as the service member, you want to know that our country has a strong foreign policy platform. And what I have seen and what I have observed is that Trump is willing to use foreign policy for his own personal ends and manipulate his own personal relationships with that. And his unwillingness to divest from his business is a real problem in a globalized economy that is more sophisticated and more interconnected. We can't have a president who is still retaining his own business deals and promising to not do foreign business deals, but his sons are doing them anyhow. It's really a problem. And then the last piece for me is the division. I'm just convinced that you cannot love, govern, influence, or shape the direction of this country if you don't love everyone. If you hate half the people in this country, or if you hate all the blue states, you can't govern this country, because this is the United States of America. And, he promised selfless leadership. He promised everything. I mean, he promised Bernie's platform. He promised Steve Bannon's platform. He promised everybody's platform to get in. But he, has failed to selflessly serve. And while I know Joe Biden won't come through on school choice for me, while I know, he may not tackle healthcare in the way that I would like. And there are a bunch of other issues that I probably won't agree on. I trust that Joe Biden loves everybody. one in this country. I trust that he cares about the entire United States. And he has such a strong foreign policy background. I think it's arguable, or I could make the argument that he's actually more conservative than Trump in the area of foreign policy and our national security. And to me, as a Marine mom, and as someone who's really passionate about our national security, he's obviously the most conservative and safest choice in that area.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for taking us through. I think that was a very thorough, analysis of where the party is right now, where the two sides in this election, the choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, what those two choices provide us. So thank you. And I have a ton more questions based off what you said, but for the sake of time and getting through some of our other guests, I'm going to move on, but I hope we'll be able to get back to some of those questions during our larger Q&A time. So up next, we have Catherine, and Catherine, you've definitely seen, if you listen to Biden Republicans rallies, you've definitely heard her ask questions. She's always one of my go-tos, and she's from Pennsylvania as well. So we've got a lot of swing state voters in this group tonight. And her Twitter bio says biotech, politics, and whiskey. So it's a party in there. So Catherine, I'm gonna ask you if you'll tell us a little bit about how you took that journey to become a Biden Republican, what your politics were before this, and yeah, why we'll start there. Are you a Republican all your life? Were you an independent? How did you get to become a Biden Republican?
So I actually have been a Republican my entire life. And when I say my entire life, I mean everything. So my first memory from childhood was when I was 2, and my parents took me to see then President Nixon to speak. And then when I was a little older in 76, I tried to talk my parents into voting for Ford, but they were Democrats, so they didn't. But when I turned 18, I finally became a registered Republican and have been since then. So I don't want to leave the party. I want the party back. So I'm still a Republican and hopefully can remain a Republican.
Okay.
But the reason I became a Biden Republican, so as you said, I'm from Pennsylvania, but I'm from the eastern side, so right outside of Philadelphia. And so I've watched Biden. I was never able to vote for him, obviously, as a senator, but I've seen him. We're very close to Delaware. And so I've seen him and his family and in the community, and have watched his career throughout the past several decades. And the one thing I appreciate is his willingness to talk to the other side, because in politics you have to, unless you own every part of the government, both houses and the White House, you need to talk to both sides or nothing will get done, as we've seen. Actually, when Trump was in charge of a Republican House and Senate, he still didn't get anything done, but probably pushed me even further. So it was not hard to remain a fan of Biden. I think I always have been. And I've always known him as a decent man. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's in England asking me about Biden, and he was saying that sometimes Biden will say some things incorrectly or maybe a little bit embarrassing. And that's true. So Biden's always been like that. Sometimes he doesn't think, but if you know the substance of a man, that's what's important to me, not some of the, minor, and he says some very minor things. Trump supporters will excuse the most awful things he said about women and Gold Star families and the military. They'll explain that away. And little flubs of Biden they think are just heinous, which I don't understand.
Yeah, I think I definitely think it's the partisan poison of our moment. in that. But so I'm curious. Okay, so you've seen Biden from living in Eastern Pennsylvania. You've gotten to see his leadership, and I'm just curious. Is there one thing that what would you say to someone who's undecided, whether that's something for Biden or against Trump? What's a message you want voters to take into this election season, into the voting booth?
I would say that we're in a unique time right now in politics. I don't think we've ever been, at least in my lifetime and in the very recent history, we've never been so divided, even without able to speak to one another. So I think, given Biden's past of being able to cross and speak to his Republican counterparts when he was in the Senate, he was, that's a hallmark of his career. And when you look at someone like Lindsey Graham, who, to my knowledge, has never had a bad thing to say about Biden, that's the type of person we need right now. He's uniquely qualified for this role today because we need to heal the country. The country has to come back together. That's what we have to do first.
I agree. Well, thank you, Catherine. Thank you for being with us and for being a day one Biden Republican supporter. So we couldn't do this without you. Okay, we're gonna go to Dennis. Dennis is from he is a pastor at a church, St. Paul, Minneapolis. He was born in Flint, Michigan. He has very thoughtful Medium posts and essays critiquing conservatism in this area, and he was also part of the Convention on Founding Principles, so I got to meet him there. So, Dennis, will you tell us a little bit about how you arrived at your decision for 2020?
Well, back in 2016, I was actually pretty excited because I think we had probably one of the more diverse fields in the GOP that we had ever had. And there were several candidates that I was thinking of at the time. I'm thinking of Rubio or Kasich. And of course, somehow we ended up with Trump. And so that year, I ended up supporting Gary Johnson for the Libertarian Party. When Trump won, I kind of thought, well, maybe he will grow into this job. Maybe he will understand some of the demands of being president. No, didn't happen. And I think what has been frustrating to see, especially for me, has been his attitudes on race and diversity and immigration. This is a country that has been diverse. It's becoming more diverse every day. We really can't afford to have a leader that is divisive, not only things to think about people that look like him, and isn't really interested in governing the entire country. I think, just a few weeks ago when he had the statement about things would be doing better with COVID if we didn't include the blue states, was incredibly offensive, because I think it showed again that he only cares about his group. And every president, whether they have been Democrat or Republican, have always believed in governing, that they know that they govern for everyone, whether they agree or not. For some reason, he's the one that he can't get it through his brain that he's really the president for everyone, not just the president for Red America. So I think for me, I decided I went for Biden, especially because I think he's had the ability of reaching across the aisle. He has been willing to reach out to Republicans, and in a way that a lot of the other candidates didn't. And so I think that even though there are things that I don't agree with him with, when if he is elected, he will be someone that will govern for everyone. And that we will feel that we are all someone that we can look up to, and feel that this is someone that while I may not agree with, he is someone that's thinking about me.
So, when I want to go back to what you said about in 2016, Republicans had the most diverse group of candidates. I think even while that was true, there were still Trump tapped into this stream that was existing among the Republican electorate. And I'm just curious, do you think that there's something about conservatism that attracts these darker elements of the right, these more nativist and racist elements? Or do you think that's unique to Trump? Or how do you think the conservative movement should deal with that moving forward? Because I don't think it's going to go away just on
No,
November.
it's not. It has actually, I believe it's always been there. And I think one of the things about conservatism, and it's not that conservatism itself is bad, but I think because as conservatives, we kind of believe in the sense of tradition, there are certain things that are good things that can kind of metastasize or become bad, where tradition kind of becomes traditionalism. And I think that that's something that has been a problem before Trump. I mean, this is something that has been, and I think it's always been there, but I think he was able to really tap into that, really work it, to bring it out in a way that it had been, I would think, latent. It was there, but it was not as strong as it is now. So I think the way that you're going to have to change this is that conservatives are actually going to have to be honest that this is a problem, that it does exist within conservatism. But I also think that another part of conservatism is the willingness to welcome people. I mean, I think that was one of the spirit of Ronald Reagan, was the sense of welcoming people, especially I think with immigration. He was very good on that. And I remember or know the history of one of the early in his presidency, he went, there was a family that had a cross burned in Maryland, and he and Nancy Reagan went there to visit that family. That's kind of the thing that, is also a part of conservatism. And I think what has to happen is really a concerted effort to say we are going to be a party and a movement that is diverse, and to try to find ways of connecting and reaching out. And that the way that you have to do this is to be intentional. Because I think that's what Trump did in 2016. He was intentional. He was very intentional in bringing out kind of nativism and racism. And I think we have to be as intentional the other way around.
Thank you. I think that's important for all of us to hear who care about where this movement and party go next. And so I'll ask you one more question. You're a pastor, and you have a lot of writings about faith. And I'm just curious, how are you seeing either your congregants or other people of faith deal with their choice in the 2020 elections? Is it how we saw a lot of reports that said 81% of evangelicals, of white evangelicals, voted for Donald Trump in 2016. So if someone's a voter of faith and they have a lot of questions about where to cast their ballot, what would you say to them?
I think especially if they are a Christian, I would really ask them to refer and to look very hard at how Jesus acted. Jesus was someone that really went to the margins of society. He cared for the outcasts and for the poor, and he healed those who were ill. That we want to have leaders that at least try to, no one's ever going to get as close as to Jesus, but I think that tries to live in that way. And I think to say basically that when we compare the life of Jesus to Donald Trump, we know there's not much that connects. And I would think again that they just need to look at what it means, that if we are, especially as Christians, supposed to be people that follow Christ, and if we have someone that we are supporting or thinking of supporting that doesn't follow Christ, then we need to think about that and maybe change our minds.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have two more folks that we want to get through, and then we're going to open up the floor. So thanks everyone for sticking around and being here. So our next Biden Republican is John Board, JB. He is from Connecticut. He was the chair of New Britain Pride and has done a lot of work for a long time with Republicans across Connecticut. So we're really excited to hear from him and what he has to say. So John, thanks for being with us. And what brought you to be a Biden Republican? Have you always been a Republican?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Reed, for hosting us tonight. And it's great to see so many fellow Biden Republicans here on the call this evening. In terms of how my sort of, to follow up Dennis, come to Jesus moment to become a Biden Republican, I think it's, to be honest, when he started doing the daily press briefings, there's a certain responsibility that a president has when they stand at the most powerful podium in the world, in the White House press briefing room. And quite frankly, I think the only more powerful one might be at the General Assembly in New York. But in terms of nations, the White House press corps podium's the most powerful one in the world. And once he just started going on his rambling rants and other, quite frankly, incoherent talks and tangents, that's kind of what threw me to not support him. Now, I'm always one who has believed you need to respect the office of the presidency. You need to have respect for the person who is in the office, but you can always have policy disagreements with those people. Now, in terms of why I support Vice President Biden to be the 46th president is, well, first of all, he's a man of the Senate. He knows the word compromise. He's been in the Senate for 40 years. He knows how to close the deal. The president, I don't think, hasn't closed that many deals during his time in office. When it comes to signing legislation, quite frankly, he's been doing what Obama did towards the end of his presidency, with signing executive orders left and right. Quite frankly, talk and compromise. I'd rather talk and compromise and be in a room with someone than simply take out a pen and sign an executive order at the end of the day. You said I'm someone from Connecticut, so I value compromise. We have the Connecticut Compromise embedded in the Constitution. And for those of you who don't know, the Connecticut Compromise set up our dual system of representation in Congress between the House by the people and the Senate by the states. So Connecticut and this nation was fundamentally built on compromise. In terms of, yeah.
Well, JB, I'm curious. What would you say to an undecided voter who's trying to make up their decision in this moment?
Yeah, so really the one thing that I would say is Vice President Biden's a leader who can bring people together. It's a time to put country over party. It's time to really make us believe in America again. To independent voters, it's not really about party whatsoever. For independents, it's about the policies that they believe in. Now, do all of us around this virtual table agree with everything that Vice President Biden stands for or that's in the Democratic platform? Oh, absolutely not at all. But that is the nature of compromise. You take a little, you give a little this, a little that. Yeah, hopefully we come out better at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that's the American way. And I think what I've heard a lot of people say that's been helpful is we don't have to agree with Biden on everything, but but we have to save the country in November, and then we'll fight out policy fights later. So, all right, thank you, and we'll get back to you in some of the Q&A later. And now I want to go to Dana. Dana is a teaching artist. She works in the memory care community and is committed to providing older adults with the opportunities to hear, recite, and create poetry. And I met her at the principal's first summit back in January or February, and have just really enjoyed connecting with her online since then. So I'm excited for you all to meet her tonight too. So thank you so much for being with us.
Sure. Thank you, Reed. Yeah, so Reed mentioned that we met at the Summit on Principled Conservatism in DC in February. And really, until I met Reed and until I attended that event, I never felt like I had a political home. I am a registered independent, and my views, my personal views, do not align with either party, so I've always kind of wandered. I identify as a pro whole life Christian. I believe life is sacred from the very beginning to the very natural end. I'm also a homeschooling mom. And so, you know, I love homeschooling. I love the choice to homeschool, but I care deeply about our public school system. Our community is there, our friends are there, the future leaders of our country are there also. So public schools, even as a homeschooler, public schools are very important to me. I'm originally from Maine. I'm a hiker. I love the ocean. I love the environment. That is so important to me. And I grieve every time an environmental protection gets rolled back, and every time climate change is denied. It breaks my heart. You know, I'm also a person of color who is college educated, and I live in the suburbs, but I'm biracial. And so, you know, my heart is in the white working class neighborhoods in this country, like the one I grew up in Maine, and like the one my mom still lives in. So I care about both of those things. And, you know, although, you know, I don't identify as a member of the LGBTQ community, some of my family members do. And because some of my family members do, and because I'm a Christian, that community is so important to me. I think that, you know, members of that community have been treated like pariah by some of my fellow believers, and that is heartbreaking to me, to see a community marginalized that way. To see the way immigrants have been treated in this country is heartbreaking to me. So even though, you know, some of my concerns are handled at a state level, you know, the person in the White House directs the national conversation on some of these issues. And so it's important to me that the person directing that conversation is directing us toward light. You know, I never supported Donald Trump. I actually was rooting, I think I was like Dave, I was rooting for John Kasich. But when Trump was elected, you know, I honestly thought there were just enough principled people around him to keep him in a very narrow lane. I just wasn't worried. I thought, it's 4 years, you know, Jesus is still on the throne. Nothing has changed in my faith. This guy's in the White House for 4 years. How bad could it really be? Really, is what I thought. And, you know, to be honest, I became, I unplugged. I became apathetic. I didn't engage. I didn't want to hear anything on the news. I was tempted to anxiety and fear. And I watched people in my church and in my church community change their primary identity from Christ to their political party. And that bothered me. And so just when I was comfortable, probably selfishly unplugging and not being involved, Charlottesville happened, and that was a wake-up call to me. I have 4 children. I have, 2 boys, and I that could have been them someplace in all of that. The weekend of Charlottesville, I cried. My family and I were apprehensive about even leaving our community. We didn't know what would happen. And just as our hearts were breaking to hear Trump say that there are very fine people on both sides of that situation was it for me. Really, I don't believe that Trump has made anybody racist. I think he has made racist people comfortable. I don't think he has made anybody unkind. I think he has guided us toward unkindness and hostility and darkness. And really, as someone who believes the Bible is true, and as someone whose highest identity is in Christ, it's a no-brainer for me. I need to love my neighbor, and I need to make a choice that will benefit my neighbor. My politics are not, that's not my faith. My faith is my faith, but my faith informs my political decisions. And I have to say, ever since meeting Reed and attending meetings like this, I've found a home, I've found wonderful people, and I've heard thoughtful conversations, and I really appreciate everyone. So thank you, Reed, and thank you, everyone.
Well, and thank you. I think you represented all those concerns and in a really compelling way. Definitely, that touches me. One of the things that I've taken to heart is that the types of policies that we enact, the types of rhetoric that comes from our leaders, it's impact. I think when we cast our vote, we need to start thinking, what kind of country are we becoming, but also what kind of person am I becoming when I choose to impact other people in this way? And that's not to tie politics into our identity or to give us too much of an inflation of our politics, because I do think, I'm a Christian, and that my identity is first and foremost in Christ. But there is a way that we treat others in the public sphere that we need to monitor. So thank you. All right, now I want to open up the floor for anybody to jump in who wants, whether you're one of the guests who've spoken or one of the Biden Republicans who's listening in on this Zoom call right now. So I'm going to go to full screen. So just so everyone knows, they'll be able to see all of us on the screen. So if you want to close your mic, you can. And the debate is starting in 10 minutes. So we're going to keep this to 5 minutes. Only, so that everybody can pop their popcorn. But our first question, and this is probably going to be our only question, is, and I've asked this to a couple people tonight already, but if you have the chance to speak to an undecided, what's something that you would tell them, whether it's one reason to support Biden, a policy, or something he said, or one reason why you don't think Donald Trump deserves their vote. So we're just going to open up the floor, and anybody who wants to join the chat can.
I'll go.
Yeah.
I just want to say that, one of the good things that has come out of the Trump era is that it's activated a lot of people into politics that weren't really activated and paying attention before. I'm a political junkie. I've run campaigns. My dad's a politician, so I love this. I mean, I don't love this, but in general, I love politics. So I think that's been a real gift. And for me, the opportunity to vote Trump out of office and just repudiate Trumpism, racism, white nationalism, it actually creates an opportunity to create something new. And I'm not with Catherine. I can't belong to a party where white nationalists are going to be part of that. There's a global white nationalism movement that's happening right now that is organized and funded. And so I'm just not willing to re-engage with that. But I think there's an opportunity to really stomp out the ashes of Trumpism and start a new center right left movement in America. And if the white nationalists, alt-right, far right, want to be that party in this country, and the far left want to have a democratic, socialist, progressive, great. I think there's a real opportunity to start something in the center, a center right left party that's committed to compromise and finding that bipartisan area, because united we stand, divided we fall. We have to find a way to reunite. So that's my 10 cents.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree. Does anybody else want to jump in? It looks like
Yeah.
Mateo.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mateo, go ahead. Welcome.
So I think one thing that I really would say to people who are undecided this election is they think of with your heart, because sadly, a lot of people nowadays, especially in the Republican Party, it's been, I'm conservative, I'm Republican, I have to vote Trump, or they're the bad guys. That's very like unhumane. It's really inhumane, right? I meant the fact that there's so many people thinking this way. That's why I would say, just think with your heart. It's something me and my father has been talking about since the beginning of this year, saying all that's happened with, and last year with, with the impeachment trials and everything that happened, seeing the Republican Party just go downhill. It was very saddened. And I feel like people have really lot less thought with their hearts and really thought with their minds, thought with their politics. And it's just something that I wish people can realize, is the fact that just sometimes we may have our own beliefs, and we may have, politically we have our own beliefs, but just because we have them doesn't mean, the person that supports our beliefs is morally correct, is someone who I can support. Because I think of Trump and I see him as someone who is not very moral. He's very immoral. He's very just wrong. He's a liar. He's lied to the people. And a lot of people don't realize that. So that's what I believe personally.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so
Hey,
Mateo,
Reed.
will you tell us where you're from and where you're zooming from? It looks like maybe a dorm.
I am, yes. I'm from California, actually.
Okay.
I'm actually in Rexburg, Idaho, BYU, Idaho. So very, very conservative part of the United States. So I'm pretty sure I'm probably the only one in this entire building that I'm in that that's believing in this and voting Biden during this election.
Well, we're glad that you're with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to be part of this. So.
Hey, Reed, we were mentioning policy, and
Yeah.
I think if there's one policy that can convince independent voters, and I know we've talked about it, and several of us on the call have in the past, is the Equality Act. The Equality Act it's a bipartisan piece of legislation that extends LGBTQ rights across the board to everyone. The vice president has said that he is going to push for that as part of his 100-day agenda. I know that there are movements all over the nation to get different municipalities behind it. Here in Connecticut, we've got 8 different municipalities signed on so far. We have 169 in the state. So we're chugging along. But if there's one policy, the Equality Act, I think, is something that can sway some people.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, JB. Thanks for the work you're doing on that. All right, so does anybody else want to leave a comment for an undecided voter before we head into the debate?
Let me just say that when we look at COVID, when we look at global warming, when we look at all the problems that we we have in this country from race relations standpoint, we we need to be together in doing this. And I think you got to ask yourself the question, who's the one that's going to be best prepared to be able to do that, to bring everybody together, to work on solving the problems that we've got, in coming up in the future. If you think it's Donald Trump, God love you, but I think you have to really look at the way that Joe Biden's approached things in the past and what he's going to do in the future. We've got to be able to come together and figure out how we're going to solve these issues. I think there's really, I don't want to say there's really only one choice, but in my mind, there is only one choice. There's one of the two that are running that are going to go out and do what they can to solve the problems that we've got coming up. And we need to do it together.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. And I don't think this is going to be our last time we're going to do it. I hope we'll do it again in October if we're able to get the technology squared away. So thank you all for joining us. And
I'll be there.
all right.
Thank you